Hi and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep and today we're going to be doing another music mystery. This time we'll be taking a dive into the genre known as Vaporwave. As you all probably know by now, we here at Debunk File really love music, and Vaporwave in particular has always been a pretty fascinating genre to us. I think a big reason for this is because it is a true movement of the internet, and is one of the first, if not the first, musical genre to completely come from the internet. Well, until today, possibly. You see, with Vaporwave seemingly coming from the internet and also blowing up very quickly, this has led people to the realization that they don't even really know how it began. This revelation is absolutely fascinating to me, and so today we hope to change that. Not only have we found some songs on the internet from much earlier than the popular start date, but we also have found a multitude of songs from before the internet entirely. These songs range from being literal complete Vaporwave to being extremely Vaporwave-esque with maybe just a tiny little detail missing. Before we begin our journey, we must define Vaporwave, as the criteria for Vaporwave has been a bit confusing to people, and I've seen a lot of mistakes revolving around the genre and its various other subgenres. Vaporwave is a sample-based music genre that often uses music from the 80s to create a surreal, oftentimes nostalgic, out-of-body-like experience. Typically, to create a Vaporwave sound, the sample or samples in questions would be tampered with in a variety of ways. The most common sampling techniques would be pitch shifting, heavy reverb, chopping, and various other methods of distortion. A lot of people describe this sound as invoking feelings of a future that doesn't exist, and that's definitely valid. For an example of what a typical Vaporwave song can sound like, why not go to the most famous Vaporwave album of them all? While this album has become a meme over the years, not only is it really good, but it showcases pretty much everything we have mentioned so far, while also showing off another important aspect of Vaporwave that we haven't actually talked about yet, and that is the art. You see, if you look at almost any Vaporwave album, you are going to notice a very distinct art style. You'll often see either backgrounds full of pinks, light blues, or purples, and will often see the image of a Greek statue, 3D rendered objects, Japanese texts or images, and various other things that once again feed into the surrealist vision and nostalgia that Vaporwave so strongly falls into. Going back to the sound of Vaporwave, it's also important to mention that like every musical genre, it has grown significantly since it began. While a Vaporwave song will typically include the aspects we mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of experimentation over the years which has created a lot of different types of sounds. For example, in 2012 we saw the birth of Vapor Trap, a very self-explanatory term, as it obviously combines a Vaporwave sound with trap, like seen here. And while Vaporwave was always synonymous with being a very mellow, slow-paced genre, there have even been some much faster-paced Vaporwave over the years, such as the works of Haircuts for Men, for examples. Keeping with the theme of being fast-paced, an entirely new genre was even formed, known as future funk. This was originally a subgenre of Vaporwave, but it became very far removed from Vaporwave and actually gained so much popularity that it has completely become its own thing. So now, with everything we have set out of the way, it's time to come up with a criteria. This is going to be a list of things that we will place in order to prove if a song is Vaporwave or not. The first few songs we get to are going to absolutely meet all these criteria. But, as we said earlier, we are really going to go farther back than probably anyone ever thought was possible. So we thought it would be important to make this. In order to classify as a Vaporwave song, it first and foremost has to be sampled. This is by far the most important part, obviously, because Vaporwave is a sample-driven genre. But the way in which the song is sampled is equally important. The song must be sampled in a way to where it is very mellow and calm, and also in a way to where it invokes feelings of nostalgia. The art portion of Vaporwave is important and is something we will address, because the thing is, a lot of the really old songs here do not feature Vaporwave art. So if that's a deal breaker for you, don't worry, because in this journey we did also find, to our knowledge, the oldest song that also features Vaporwave-like art. With all that being said though, the farther back you go, Vaporwave wasn't even a real thing yet, so naturally these songs are not going to have that art. As we said, we have found stuff that are much older than we ever thought were possible. So with everything we have said previously out of the way, the last thing I have to say is to simply strap up. because this is going to be a wild adventure. Let's do this. We're going to start at the ultra-famous, previously mentioned Floral Shop. And well, as I'm sure you know, this is not the first Vaporwave album. Not only did it come pretty early in the Vaporwave lifespan, but it's actually hugely important as it truly blew Vaporwave up. Without this album, Vaporwave would likely be an obscure genre of music. Not only that though, but it was one of the first albums to be officially labeled as Vaporwave from the start. As we said, it's far from the first Vaporwave album, but this is the first one to officially be known as a Vaporwave album from the beginning, if that makes sense. With that being said though, over a year earlier, an album released that is commonly regarded as being the very first album in the Vaporwave scene, and it is called Eccojams Volume 1, made by the mysterious Chuck Persons. Eccojams Volume 1 came out in August of 2010, and has every single characteristic of Vaporwave in the book. With that being said though, if you are a Vaporwave fan, you likely already know about this album since it is a fan favorite of the genre, and as stated previously, is often considered the very first of the genre. But what if I told you this wasn't even the artist's first foray into the Vaporwave scene? Coming out a few months earlier under another alter ego, an album titled Spend the Night With was released. And this one also has a complete Vaporwave sound going for it as well. Behind all these alter egos is a man known as Daniel Lopatin, and if you don't know him, he is one of the best plunderphonics musicians to ever live. Plunderphonics is the manipulation of samples, which obviously is needed for Vaporwave, so it's natural that such a legend in the plunderphonics scene would also make some of the earliest official Vaporwave. But get ready for this. What if I told you that wasn't his first piece of Vaporwave music either? Yeah, for this last one, we're going to really travel far back. All of these ancient Vaporwave tracks so far are from the year 2010, but this final stop in Daniel Lopatin's cesspool of alter egos lands us an entire year back, 2009. July 2009 to be exact, right here on YouTube. On July 19th, 2009, a YouTube channel under the name Sunset Corp would post multiple tracks all on the same day, that are arguably the earliest examples of pure 100% Vaporwave that we can find. I mean hell, the song Nobody Here even has a similar art style going through it for the entire video. With that being said though, it's not this easy. I'm sure you can see how this video is structured so far, so yeah, the journey is far from over. Let's keep diving. In February of 2009, there was a song titled The Chill Pill that was released. If I'm being totally honest, I only found this song after searching up what the first Vaporwave song was on YouTube, and this one had a video that confidently proclaimed it as being the very first Vaporwave song ever. This claim isn't without its merit. Being a couple months older than even Daniel Lopatin's oldest forays into the genre, and still having a sound that is Vaporwave without a shadow of the doubt, I was pretty amazed at this discovery. Next up, I of course wanted to look more into the man that made this song, and he is known as Charles Hamilton. He is a rapper who also produces his own stuff, and actually released an album an entire year before this song came out. While this album does include tracks that have samples that are extremely Vaporwave-esque, the tempo and overall feel of the songs don't match enough to truly consider them Vaporwave in my opinion, but I'll let you be the judge of that. With all that being said though, the dive still continues. It's time to go back even further. Now, let's introduce you all to somebody known as JPEG Mafia. This man is a modern day rapper who also produces everything he makes. Today he makes extremely experimental, abrasive music that will suddenly switch and become melodic with a snap of a finger. He is one of the most cutting edge artists in the entire rap scene, constantly changing up his sound to keep things interesting, but he has a much deeper history than almost anybody would realize. You see, the first album released under the JPEG Mafia name is from 2015, and like his music now, it's pretty abrasive. But like Daniel Lopatin, he had an alter ego. In this case, the name is Devin Hendrix. JPEG Mafia has talked a lot about his life in these Devin Hendrix days, and he was actually in the military when he first started putting out music. He was stationed in various places like Japan and Iraq to name a few, and during this all, he would literally be producing. Just listen to the man himself talk about it.
I was deployed in Iraq. They call them mortars. Like whoever would like come to the gate, they can't get in, so like they would just come to the gate, flick these mortars over, and they would blow up. And every time they blow up, you got to get in it's like an alarm go off. You got to get in the fetal position. Yeah, I was making beats through all that. Like I was just trying, like after a while I was like, I'm not getting in the fetal position anymore. So I was just like making beats every day.
So yeah, starting in the year 2007, JPEG Mafia was making an album called Dreamcast Summer Tapes, and it is just unbelievable. This album truly has it all. It has tracks that completely without a shadow of a doubt are Vaporwave, and then it has others that sound like Vaporwave subgenres that didn't even exist yet. Here are some of the tracks on the album with a more traditional feel. There's also tracks on this album that sound like darker, more ambient Vaporwave, like this one. Craziest of all, there's some tracks on this album that sound straight up like future funk, which as stated, obviously didn't even exist yet. If you haven't heard this album, I honestly can't recommend it enough, especially if you are a fan of Vaporwave, as, like we have shown, it hits basically all the beats to qualify. Even the art isn't that far off. Of course, it doesn't match completely, but it does have the same glitchy imagery that some of these albums' covers share. So yeah, 2 years before Daniel Lopatin ever made a Vaporwave track, and 1 year before the supposed first Vaporwave track, JPEG Mafia was out here doing it, and even some of its subgenres. And then 2 years before that, we have yet another guy making complete Vaporwave music before it was even considered a thing yet. This artist is known as 18 Karat Affair. And starting in the year 2005, he began working on an album called Spent Passions. And well, just take a listen to some of these tracks. So the origin point goes back even further. This is the first point so far where the cover art doesn't really fit too much anymore, and while it still has palm trees and a bit of glitchy imagery, I'm sure you'd agree that this doesn't really look too much like a Vaporwave album cover. If this is a deal breaker to you, then consider either JPEG Mafia or Daniel Lopatin to be the very first of this genre. If that's not a deal breaker to you, then strap on in because this journey is far from over. The next person that made a few Vaporwave-esque songs is honestly so unexpected it might make your jaw drop. It's somebody we've already actually made an entire video on before. That man is MF Doom. That's right, the supervillain himself made a few beats that sounded incredibly similar to Vaporwave. The craziest part? These songs range from the early 2000s to the late 90s. I didn't even think Vaporwave could get this old, but it sure can. The most popular of these Vaporwave-esque songs would have to be Zatar, and for good reason. Take a listen. I wouldn't say that this is a complete 100% match, but it is very close. The sample is absolutely, completely in the realm of Vaporwave, and so is its method of chopping that is used. With that being said though, while it does definitely hit that nostalgic aspect that is integral for a Vaporwave track, it doesn't really have that surreal, out-of-body-like experience. Still though, I'd consider this one a Vaporwave track. While not being completely perfect as we stated, I do think it is still very close, and was honestly likely an inspiration for the genre we all know today. Speaking of the very early 2000s, I wanted to give you a very quick shout out to the album Since I Left You. This is not a Vaporwave album, but since we mentioned future funk earlier, I wanted to very quickly shout this one out since it completely sounds like a precursor to future funk. And honestly sounds so spot on, I'd even consider it being the very first future funk album. Anyways, with that being said, I think you know what I'm gonna say. That's right, it still goes further back. With Vaporwave taking a lot from the 80s, I didn't realize just how close to the 80s some of these songs could be. Way back in the year 1994, the rap group Digital Planets released a jazz rap album called The Blowout Comb. And while the album doesn't really share too much in common with Vaporwave, there is one track that does, and it really does. Remember the more fast-paced kind of Vaporwave we talked about and showed with the group Haircuts for Men? Well, keep that in mind when listening to this right here. While being fast-paced, nearly everything about this track's production screams Vaporwave. The sample in question literally sounds like elevator music, it's chopped up in a very familiar way, and it even distorts to give off a trippy feel. Despite being really old, this track is stunningly close. And with everything being shown so far, we have reached our final destination. That's right, after all the countless times of going farther and farther back, we have finally gone back so far, there isn't anywhere else to reach. As you've surely noticed, while a lot of these songs we've shown recently are still very close to Vaporwave, they aren't completely 100% exact. But what if I told you, the very oldest possible example might actually be a complete match all the way through? Let me introduce you to DJ Screw. This man started producing in the very early 1990s, and his style of producing is so similar to early Vaporwave, it's actually shocking. Just listen to these snippets. This is so close to Vaporwave, and it's such a long time ago, it actually doesn't even seem like it should be possible, but it is. While I would leave it to you guys to truly judge whether or not you consider this a Vaporwave track or not, for me, this is undeniable. To me, it sounds pretty much as much of a Vaporwave track as anything on Eccojams, and when you realize that these tracks came from years as early as 1993, I am still just in absolute awe. This is some mind-bending stuff. But do you know what's even better? I was looking through some interviews of Daniel Lopatin, who, as we've shown, previously was the creator of Eccojams and the aforementioned Sunset Core channel, and he actually mentioned DJ Screw at one point. So yeah, with Screw straight up influencing Lopatin, who was one of the first ever to do Vaporwave online and is often considered the father of the entire scene, then this all but confirms DJ Screw as the grandfather of the entire genre. And that's the end of our journey into the history of Vaporwave. As for our final rating, this wasn't really a mystery that was too much about debunking, rather being more of a search. However, we did completely debunk the fact that Eccojams was absolutely not the first piece of Vaporwave, and that Lopatin's earlier stuff wasn't either. So in terms of that, we definitely did debunk the popular notion that he created Vaporwave. As I'm sure you've seen, the history of Vaporwave is a wild, wild journey, and it all stops at DJ Screw. If he never did what he did way back in the early 90s, which still completely holds up today, then this genre literally would not be here. Overall though, this was an incredibly fun mystery to get to the bottom of, and it wound up going back much further than we ever thought. With there being so much music in the world, I'm sure we have even missed some Vaporwave songs. If we did, let us know. If you have any more ancient Vaporwave songs out there, make sure to leave them in the comments. We will definitely be looking. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to follow all of our social medias for updates and exclusive content, all linked in the description. Especially consider becoming a patron, as even $1 a month really helps and you guys get some slick rewards. And of course, make sure to like this video, share this with your friends, and subscribe. As always, my name is Sep from Debunk File. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.